There was an interesting flare-up in Tynwald over the appointment of 2 new directors to the government-owned Isle of Man steam packet company. Some members were incensed by a particular line of questioning from Douglas Central MHK Chris Thomas, and he was asked to withdraw what were described as disparaging remarks. Is it possible to question candidates' suitability for certain roles in such a public forum? And if it isn't, then Tynwald's role in the process seems limited to merely rubber-stamping a decision taken behind closed doors in the corridors of power. Perhaps the best place to start is the debate and comments made by Bill Henderson, the President, Laurie Hooper and Chris Thomas.
Actor N, I'd like to fully support the commentary made 2 speakers ago from the Honourable Member Mrs Jane Poole-Wilson and ask the court to seriously reflect on the commentaries that were made by the member for Douglas Central, Mr Thomas, and I hear the same commentary being not as heavily reiterated, but reiterated just now from Mr Morehouse in a way, for members. There's a questioning on the appropriateness and system that's already in place. And I think, Actor N, the Honourable Member for Douglas Central should be the recipient of some sort of advice from this court, perhaps, I don't know how else to put it, in withdrawing some of those remarks, because the inferences that were made, to my view, are quite damaging. And really, they should be withdrawn and taken off the record.
The vote was taken and declared by Mr President.
The vote is 25 for, 1 against, and I would just make comment there that the Speaker did ring the bell for those members who were missing out of this court to call them back to make that vote. Honourable members, that means that the item 7 is passed and is carried.
Just a point of order, Mr President. I wanted to wait till the debate is finished before I mention this, but there's been a lot of comment there about remarks that were made during the debate. Now, the standing orders allow for those remarks to be withdrawn during the debate when they're made, but how does it work when the member has actually left the chamber and doesn't return till after the debate? What is the procedure for having those remarks withdrawn, as was requested by a member of council? That doesn't seem that would have been possible if the member who made the remarks had left during the debate. So can you just provide some clarity on that?
I'm happy to rule on that point there. The Honourable Member, Mr Henderson, did ask for those remarks to be removed by Honourable Member Mr Thomas. I'll now invite Mr Thomas to actually withdraw those remarks. Mr Thomas, would you like to withdraw those remarks?
Which remarks in particular, Mr President?
Disparaging remarks regarding one of the non-executive directors.
Again, I draw a point of order to the attention of Mr Thomas. You, sir, made personal, or what could be construed as personal comments directed towards somebody who's not in the court, who can't answer back, and in fact you degraded their conduct, their situation to such a degree that I think you're in breach of parliamentary procedure as well. You should not have made those comments and allegations. You know which ones they were. You had it all prepared there. I've invited you, with Actor N's permission, that some of the allegations and the perceptions you gave, really, you should have the honourable nature to withdraw those particular items.
Mr Thomas, would you wish to withdraw?
I'm still at the last. All I can remember, I haven't got any prepared remarks. I can't read what I said, but as far as I remember, the personal commentary was just to bring to attention one item on the summary CV that didn't seem to be there. The rest was general comments about relationships between Treasury, and I think describing somebody as political when you've been in MHK is fair comment. But if the President could bring to my attention some particular disparaging remarks, I noticed were described as slanderous, apparently. I'd be appreciative of that.
So you're not going to withdraw?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Thomas,
I withdraw any remarks that were disparaging.
Chris Thomas there, withdrawing remarks that he wasn't convinced he had mentioned. The one vote against was from Jason Morehouse, with 4 members of the House of Keys effectively choosing to duck the vote. So why did Jason Morehouse vote against? it's fair to say that we do record this interview at a fairly lively juncture in Tynwald. I mean, I suppose to start with, what did you make of the little spat that took place in relation to the appointment of directors to the Isle of Man steam packet?
I think it was historic, and I think the questions will now be asked of what role does Tynwald have to play in this process, because at the moment it's a mere rubber stamp of a choice that's happened somewhere else. We're legitimating a process without any input, and as we saw this morning, if you don't actually fully support the choices, there are limited options in terms of what you can do. There are directorships and things where Tynwald has that capacity to accept, and it's one of those things that comes through every 2 or 3 months, and it is difficult when you're given the CVs, you're given a little bit of information about the role, and you're simply asked to accept or not accept. And with 99.9 of us accepting all the time, it was interesting this morning we'd actually a steam packet issue, and we'd a known former member of Tynwald on the list that some people thought, oh, this is potentially a chance to actually ask questions about what's happening within the process.
And you chose not to support the appointment. So what was your reason behind that?
I think it was just in terms of, given the role, I felt that the person that we were having the choice to take forward had already too much luggage in terms of their responsibility in Treasury when the boat was taken over and other things. And I just thought it was an opportunity for fresh eyes, fresh thoughts, and it was nothing at all against the individual concerned. I just thought, in terms of where we are, if I have a choice between accepting this and potential alternatives in the future, I'm going to go with potential alternatives in the future.
I asked the mover of the debate, Russian MHK Michelle Hayward, what she made of the heat generated by this apparently innocuous item.
Yes, one of the things we see come before Tynwald quite frequently is motions to appoint particularly non-executive directors to a variety of boards that the government has interest in. And
yet this isn't a board, is it? This is a company, and that was one of the questions that was raised. Why this company and not many of the other companies that Treasury or government has effectively a controlling interest in? Why specifically Isle of Man steam packet? Why did you need Tynwald approval for these directors?
We have Tynwald approval for the NEDs wherever we're appointing to them. So whether it's government boards, whether it's government-owned companies, which is what this clearly is, it's standard procedure. For the directors for Laxey Glen Flour Mills, which sits in exactly the same way of being a separate company. So it's nothing unusual to bring it through.
I didn't think that Laxey Glen was.
Yeah, we've had them on the order paper.
Okay, well, I stand corrected then. In relation then to this specific item, it's fair to say that tempers became a little heated, or members certainly, there was a fair amount of disagreement in relation to the way in which a few members chose to pursue the debate. What were your concerns in relation to that?
I think my concerns are that there seemed to be some issue, and I don't know if it goes back to personality clashes when one of the proposed candidates was a member of the House. That is over 2 years ago now since that was the case. And there seemed to be almost some sort of personal vendettas being pursued, allegations being made that the process hadn't been properly followed, that there should be some conflict of interest, that there may have been some kind of advantage gained by the fact that he was a member of Treasury at the time the steam packet was bought. All of those things kind of came through as allegations. And obviously you're challenging then somebody who is not there to defend themselves, but equally you're challenging the recruitment process that the Treasury have run, and it was quite clear. It was an open advertisement. Shortlisting was carried out. Officers that knew any of the candidates were excluded themselves from the process, as would happen normally. And I think you have to be realistic about the fact that the island is a small island. There are only so many people that will want to serve on in such roles, or of the right calibre to do so. And as the Speaker observed, once we leave the service of Tynwald, we become private people again, and therefore should we be excluded from serving any future role that has any connection with government in the future? That's clearly not sensible at all. Why would you lose somebody with experience and understanding and the skills that you need to try and do the best job?
The reasonable, I think, question that has been raised, though, is whereas it's great to have people with finance and marketing expertise appointed to the board, it seems strange that there is nobody left on the board with operational experience of running a ferry company. Is that something you're concerned about?
I think that's a very separate question to what we were dealing with this morning. I'm aware of concerns over the director that left that was responsible for operations, and I think it's something I've been keeping an eye on, but it's not. It wasn't the point of the motion today. If the board feel that they are lacking in operational support, then they need to flag that up, and that needs to come back into Treasury, who can look at whether they need to appoint anyone else.
And it's not as though the company lacks operational experience, it's just the board of directors.
Yeah, exactly. And there are very, very experienced managers and officers within the company that are running the day-to-day operations. Clearly, the ferry still sailed today.
So then, on reflection, you got the two directors appointed. Is there any lesson to be learned from the way in which the debate was construed?
I think I'm really disappointed in the behaviour of some of the members, because there was almost a pull the pin out, launch a grenade in, make all sorts of allegations, and then be out of the chamber when the vote was there. So fine if you're going to object to something, but if you're going to object to it, you should be in that chamber to press the no button and object to it. To actually just speak and then walk out of the chamber, I think is just disgraceful behaviour.
Well, what was Chris Thomas up to? You, Julie Edge, Anne Corlett and Claire Christian both made a point of walking out so that you missed the vote. What was the reason behind that?
Well, I don't think I did make any personal comments. In fact, somebody said I was slanderous. I hope I wasn't slanderous. Full respect for Mr. Shimmons. I think I made some serious points about the governance of the steam packet and other arm's length bodies. When I walked out, it was after the Deputy Chief Minister stood up and started saying that what I'd said was inappropriate, and I just had to do something because it's perfectly appropriate when you've got a committee of Tynwald looking at the governance of the steam packet that hasn't as yet reported. You've got a member of that committee in, Dr. Hayward. They're moving for Treasury the appointment of some people before her committee reports in the next couple of months on the governance of the steam packet. I do think it's important that I said what I said, and it's a matter of public record now, and apologies to Mr. Shimmons or the other member that was being appointed. That's it.
It certainly appeared, and certainly it incensed Mr. Speaker, who seemed quite animated, whispering to the President, and he apparently rang the bell which is rung in the members' room to encourage members to come back because a vote is about to take place, but the members didn't return. Do you think that because effectively you weren't in, would you have voted in favour or against had you been in the debate?
I probably would have voted against, but it wouldn't have made any difference. But let me go back to Mr. Speaker's role in all of this. We have a presiding officer in Tynwald Court, Mr. President. In general terms, I guess Mr. Speaker has a role as a presiding officer 3 weeks out of 4 in terms of the standards of members behaving, but he doesn't have any role in that capacity. There's no standing order in Tynwald about ringing a bell. The standing order is just as if you're in Tynwald, you have to vote. I think ministers have been out of the voting process throughout the eons of time. It's a tradition in Tynwald. So, for instance, when Casey Brunner investigated, she remarked that when right at the beginning of the COVID period, the Chief Minister and myself were not in the room when a key vote was taken. I think the Chief Minister told her that he probably should have been fired like I was. So, look, if I behaved badly, I apologise for behaving badly. I raised some very important issues about the governance of arm's length bodies. I started with the fact with why was Tynwald are being asked to confirm these appointments. Because
and what was the answer to that question?
I didn't get an answer to any of my questions. I didn't.
Well, how do you know? Because you weren't there for
I was listening downstairs. As you know, we were in the normal place where Chief Minister in previous times always used to sit with his in a circle during boring sittings when people like Chris Thomas were speaking and so on. So it's we have what's being said played out to us in different parts of the court. And so the first point I made was, why is Tynwald doing? We don't approve the trustees of Manx Radio. We don't approve Lexi Glen Mills. We haven't had the Isle of Man. Well, there's just lots of cases where we don't approve. So I asked that's a very simple question. I asked about pay relative to other people. I also said, had there been reflection on the fact that we're having a campaigning politician involved in a board? Was it a reflection on the fact that the governance of the steam packet hadn't worked in the last few months? And I made a very specific comment, which is in October 2023, perhaps at the beginning of November, I forget exactly when the question was, the Treasury Minister basically either feigned or was ignorant of the emissions controls on the Ben Macrae, and I knew at that time full well that he'd had a document that I'd had back in April of that year explaining all of that. So, I was suggesting perhaps Treasury needed more direct hands-on control, and was that a criterion? And
I think that was part of the reason why some members at least felt incensed. Effectively, you were suggesting that Treasury had appointed or was endeavouring to appoint friends or stooges onto the board. I've never worked with Bill Shimmons, but I don't, from what I hear of him, I don't see him as being someone who will effectively do what he's told.
Well, I'm not going to comment any about that, and that's not the point I made. I just said, was it a criticism of the way that the governance had worked? And I go back to my main point.
Well, to be fair, you did say that, or you suggested, you intimated that perhaps that these appointments were being made so that Treasury would have more control over what the steam packet was doing.
Yeah, and it could fall out two ways. In my experience, which I also mentioned, Mr. Shimmons is a campaigning politician, so he had, I did mention in my speech that one role he'd had wasn't mentioned on his summary CV, which is he had joined the Housing and Communities Board and then wrote me and the Chief Minister a letter of resignation because he wasn't happy with the way that we were going. I probably agreed with lots of the things he was saying, but that's the sort of political thing to do, to resign from a board. He wasn't questioning the governance. He had a view about how it should go. He's pretty critical of civil servants and the realities of the civil service. So look, where I am now is I want people to focus, like I am, on the governance of the steam packet and bodies like it, like the Manx Development Corporation. My main point, which I tried to make today, was that we have a select committee looking at the governance and the shareholding of the steam packet, and have we not preempted the debate we'll be having about the findings of the steam packet report, because the whole of the Sea Services Agreement is under consideration. It's this 5-yearly strategic reset, and the governance was added into that through the select committee motion.
A number of members were quite incensed by what you had to say and suggested that it was wrong to effectively have a dig at someone, a named person who was basically not in a position to respond. Do you accept that perhaps you need in future to be a little bit more cautious in the way you approach these things?
I'll go back to what I have tried to say throughout this interview. Governance of the steam packet is what matters. I hope my remarks weren't personal. My remarks are about the sort of approach to appointing governors. I have had my hands burned in a similar way once before. I'm the longest serving chair of Culture Vannin, I now believe, and Council of Ministers and Tynwald send members to Culture Vannin, and there has been at least one incident in the past where we had to have audit look into a situation of appointment to a board, because obviously ultimately the board is collectively responsible for the governance of an organisation. There are shareholders of an organisation. We're in an area and evolve as this government has latched on to the concept of arm's length bodies. We're in an evolving area, and I hope my contribution will help people reflect. Mr. Shimmons is grown up. I'd like to think he might even be a friend of mine. We have forthright debates, and I hope he can see that this is about making his life when he gets to the company easier as well, because we need clarity in terms of the role of people. It's not the first time I've done it. I've also been engaged in the Skills Strategy Board, and I've engaged in the Health Services Consultative Committee Board, and there are lots of people out there who do public service and are very worried about the direction in the last 2 or 3 years about centralised power versus these arm's length bodies and vice versa.
Finally, Middle MHK and Deputy Chief Minister Jane Poole-Wilson. You were a little angry, perhaps that's the best way to put it, with some of the comments that Chris Thomas had to make.
I wouldn't describe it as angry. I think my point, and it was made by others in the debate actually, was I think there is a difference between a system issue, which is, if you think generally that people who have been members of Tynwald should not be eligible to stand for various or be recruited into various positions, then that is a system change that needs to be made. I think the difficulty I would have with that sort of system change in any event is, whilst it's best practice, and I think Mr. Speaker referenced this, it's best practice very often for people who've held senior civil service posts or been politicians to allow a cooling off period, maybe of a year or so after going out of office. That should not preclude people ultimately who go back to being private citizens from being able to apply for and go through normal due process, appropriate open recruitment processes, and then if they are the appropriate person for the role, to be offered that role. And I think particularly in the Isle of Man, I think there's a problem if we start to bar out former members of Tynwald from a range of roles, in that very often they may come with relevant expertise, whether from their former lives before being politicians or because they have understood something about the operation of different bodies while they've held a role in Tynwald. So I think we're in danger of knocking out suitable experience and expertise that we can make very good use of. And I think the other thing is we'd then be in danger perhaps of fewer people even thinking of putting themselves forward for a role in Tynwald, potentially, if they thought that they would not be able to go forward for roles after they left Tynwald. So that was my concern. And my other concern was, I think it starts to get very difficult in Tynwald Court when individuals are being referenced, but they have no right of response. And I think that's a difficult situation to comment on what has happened, why somebody may or may not have done something. And they're not there to be able to speak on their behalf and change that. So, I thought it was very important to articulate that in the debate.
And yet, a number of the points that Chris Thomas raised would be questions that many members of the public would be interested to know answers to. They would be wanting to know, why was it that the board of directors of the Isle of Man steam packet apparently now has no operational expertise. They would also wonder, why is it that directors of a government-owned company need to be approved by Tynwald? The Tynwald members, effectively, they're given a take it or leave it. These are the directors. We've undertaken a process. You've not been involved in that process, but now we want you to approve them. That's not an unreasonable question to ask, is it? Well,
I think as Chris and all members of Tynwald will know, there are often appointments made that come forward to Tynwald for approval without members of the court having been involved by and large. Perhaps only one member of the court may have been involved in the actual recruitment, interviewing and decision-making process, depending on the role. So it is not unusual for there to be a range of appointments that do come forward. And I think that lends an element of transparency, actually, and awareness. So I don't think there's anything unusual in that. And as I say, my concern predominantly was, I think we need to be very distinct between system questions and discussion and not then taking that into what I would worry about might become to more of the personal level. And that's what I felt quite strongly needed to be articulated.
Mr. Thomas has told me in an interview that the reason he walked out of the chamber was because of the rebuke that you gave him. How would you respond to that?
Well, as memory serves, I think he was on his way out as I was standing up. But I suppose what I would say is, surely in debate, we all listen to each other and what each other what we have to say. I would expect that no matter what the subject matter, people have different views. People want to articulate what they think and why. It would be normal for people to be in the chamber to listen to those different perspectives.
So what do you think? Storm in a teacup or serious breach of parliamentary protocols? I have to say I listened to the whole debate, and while Chris Thomas pushed some boundaries of Tynwald discourse, I was more surprised at what seemed to me to be an overreaction from some Tynwald members. How can items such as this be reasonably considered by Tynwald if members are not allowed to question anything about the individuals concerned or ponder over the possible political motivation for certain public appointments? For now, though, I'm Phil Gaughan. Goramayo, thanks for listening.